Hello， 大家好，欢迎回到北美韭菜日记，我是九九。如果说 Michael Burry 是世纪大空头的话，那 Tom Lee 应该算得上是万年大多头。自从我关注以来呢，基本上他每次出来讲话都是在看多的，而且每次还都能给出不一样看多的理由。当然了，在过去10几年的超级大牛市的行情里，万年看多的肯定要是比万年看空的吃香很多的，起码给吃瓜群众们的感觉是你对的次数是要比错的次数多的。但是在接下来的几年，这样的行情还能不能继续上演？整个市场都在恐慌，会不会来一次2000年或者是08年那种级别的大熊市？如果碰上了，一路唱多，一路加仓，最后可能也会是输的血本无归。市场里目前多空较量可谓是剑拔弩张，刀光剑影，硝烟弥漫，杀机四伏。前几天出了一个短视频，是大空头 Michael Burry 喊话说美股一定会创出新低。那么今天一起来看看大多头这边是什么观点，一起请出本期嘉宾 Tom Lee。这期视频花了不少时间，手动加上了字幕，如果看完觉得有帮助的话，千万不要忘记留下一个点赞。祝大家先赞后看，股票大赚。在视频的最后呢，我也会给出我自己的看法。OK， 那么废话不多说，一起先来看片。
It's been a while since you and I have spoken. Give me your take here as to why you don't think this is simply a bear market rally, because plenty of market participants, I'm sure that you speak to and that I do, are still looking for weakness yet to come.
Hi, David. Yeah, great to see you. I think there's been a cognitive negative bias to markets since the Fed began tightening and since inflation rose, and most of our institutional investor clients think that this is a template for a recession, and many think this is August 08. So we're only in the early stages of a deep downturn. And the reason we're more constructive on markets is one, over the past 9 months, I think investors became convinced that inflation is with us for years, and it's very sticky. But it looks like inflation is proving to be a lot less sticky and maybe even more sensitive to gasoline falling because of how gasoline moves through the services CPI. And if that's correct, then we are tracking more towards a soft landing that's more like 2018. And that would mean markets have already discounted much of the Fed tightening. And so we would want to be buying this rally. And then I think in the past 2 weeks, the market internals, whether you look at the percentage of stocks above the 50-day or market retracements, or even moving back towards the 200-day, are actually kind of confirming that this looks more like the start of a new bull market rather than a bear market rally that leads to new lows.
Let's go to the bond market. So I know you've also been talking about that in terms of where the 10-year is right now and what the implied PE therefore is, and whether you can anchor some sort of a PE for the S&P based on that. Are you getting confident that, in fact, PEs could be going higher as a result of sort of, let's call it, we're in the right range for the 10-year?
David, that's definitely coming back to us, because when clients talk about the fear that inflation's sticky, we point to the 10-year at 2.8. That's hardly where it was in the 80s. The 10-year should properly reflect inflation expectations, and at 2.8, it's really a market that thinks inflation gets back towards something like 2% after a couple years. And then we know people talk about the inverted yield curve between the 10-year and 2-year. But what they have to keep in mind is that if inflation in the next 2 years is at 4, the 2-year yield has to be higher than the 10-year. So you're going to get a forced inversion just because of the contours of inflation, and it doesn't mean that the curve on a real basis inverted. So yes, I think the bond market's telling us a better story than the equity investors want to believe.
Tom, I want to press you a little bit on your view of Fed policy. You see it as becoming more dovish, but what leads you to believe so? I mean, we got minutes yesterday, and it was easy to see sort of the hawkish side of them. More restrictive rates is required. Commodity price decline, even though you've talked about it, they say that it's not enough. And they said that there's a danger that inflation becomes entrenched. Is this market not simply fighting the Fed, which conventional wisdom tells us is a very bad idea?
Well, I think that the word dovish and hawkish are used by too many investors and by most of our clients as like a binary fact. The Fed needs to raise rates. They're at the neutral rate now. But let's say that they get to 3.5, even 3.75 or 4, which is further tightening. That may not be a shock to equity markets. And you can look at many periods when the Fed's been raising rates, and that second half of a rate cycle, equities start to rally. That even happened in August 82 when the Fed hadn't given up the inflation fight, was still trying to shock markets, but the stock market bottomed 10 weeks before the Fed even posited shifting. So I think that this is not necessarily about a Fed pivot. It's about the fact that the Fed isn't trying to shock markets and deliver essentially a nuclear financial tightening. That's what they were trying to accomplish early this year. That's not the case anymore.
What leads you to believe that's not the case? Why would they be less aggressive, Tom? Sorry, that was sort of my original question, leaving hawkishness and dovishness aside. What commentary have you heard from them?
Well, I don't think the Fed's going to be any less aggressive. So I think if we look at September and through year end, I think there's 100 basis points of further tightening. But for financial markets, if the 10-year stays at 2.8, but the Fed is getting towards 4, now there's going to be some panic because that looks like an inverted curve. But what I think is going to be key and in retrospect will matter is that the 4% is coming because realized inflation is quite high. So the Fed does need to keep rates high short term. But the 10-year is reflecting sort of durable or sustained inflation. That's staying low. So I think the markets can handle the Fed getting to 4. That's not dovish. I mean, that's still raising rates. I just don't consider that a shock to markets because that's what's priced into the swaps market today.
Tom, I can remember years ago we used to track active managers underperforming. I have no idea if you gave up even bothering with that. But if you haven't, where do things stand in that in terms of them trying to play catch up?
David, we actually do track the data. We'd be happy to send that to you folks. It's not been a great year for active managers and for hedge funds. Part of it is everyone's been whipsawed, and there was a lot of what I'd consider rage capitulation in June because the fundamental data in June was just so shockingly bad on the inflation, people gave up. What we've seen in the last 6 weeks, talking to our clients, and we speak to our team speaks to hundreds of clients every week. The institutional investors still very nervous because they think there's earnings risk. They're cautiously positioned. There's nothing that can give them the confidence to actually add risk. So this is a rally that's been met with a lot of skepticism. Now, it could run out of steam and make new lows, but given the incoming data, and we talk about that inflationism isn't as hawkish. I mean, today's Philly Fed shows, inflationary pressures even in the PMIs are kind of decreasing. I think it's a lot easier for the S&P to make new all-time highs than to make new all-time lows.
来总结一下他的发言，重点其实可以归纳为2点。第一就是通胀已经见顶，或者说是快要见顶。他的主要论据呢，就是看10年期国债收益率大概维持在 2.9% 的位置，就再也上不去了。咱们都知道，一般情况下呢，债市反映经济指标相对来说还是比较准确的。第二点就是金融市场总是会跑在美联储前面的，比如说现在的市场自6月下旬以来一路上涨，但同时呢，美联储这边是并没有透露出任何有可能会宽松的信号。看似市场是在和美联储对着干，但实际上呢，市场是有可能领跑了美联储1到2个月，有可能是和几个月之后的美联储的态度是保持同步的。采访里他还举了82年大通胀时候的例子，股市是提前预测到了美联储的转向，并且在美联储pivot的10周之前就已经开始上涨了，10周之后呢，美联储果然就开始由鹰转鸽了。针对他这2点看多的论据，我来鸡蛋里面挑一些骨头啊。这种时期对于任何人的任何观点，我觉得都抱有批判性思维来看待的话，可能会比较稳妥。经过了这次熊市，相信大多数朋友也包括我自己都已经意识到了，金融市场里从来就没有什么救世主，也不靠神仙皇帝，要创造钱包的幸福还是得靠我们自己。首先看 Tom Lee 说的10年期国债收益率这个事情，虽然说目前是在 3% 以下的，但是不代表说之后就不会再涨上去啊。归根到底还是要看通胀数据能不能持续走低。债券市场预测经济走势的确是要比股市准确一些，但也不代表说就一成不变了。就比如说这一段6月份通胀数据出来的时候，半个月内收益率就直接从 2.7% 飙到了 3.5%。大家也都知道，这一段也是股市里跌得最凶的半个月，基本上股市见底和国债收益率见顶算是已经同步了。所以从这个方面看的话呢，我倒不觉得说债市就比股市预测的提前多少了。 再来说它的第二点，就是股市总是会跑在美联储之前，很有可能说是在美联储由鹰转鸽之前呢，美股已经从底部反弹了 20%， 反弹了 30% 了。这一点我是完全同意的。如果最终趋势形成反转，大牛市再次开启的话，一定会是这种走法。But 我不同意或者说不确定的地方是，这次反弹是不是就一定代表了趋势的反转呢？这个我是不敢打包票的。我也不认为汤姆利这边的确定程度有他在视频采访里看上去的那么自信。很不巧，在4月初的时候他就说过类似的话，觉得股市在年底之前会创出新高，但是接下去2个月发生了什么，咱们也都看到了。采访最后，汤姆利说他认为股市创出新高的可能性是要比新低的可能性要大的。但是我个人其实是觉得创出新低，或者是起码再度测试一下6月份底部的可能性，是要比直接一波拉上去的可能性要高一些的。二者比例在我这里可能是 55% 比 45% 左右的样子。当然我也没经历过大通胀，只是我根据听到的信息以及收集来的数据做出的判断，可信度有多少大家自行判断。当然了，好处是即使不幸被我蒙对了，我相信咱们很多朋友应对方案应该准备的也还行。这是我最近做的2轮调查，一模一样的问题，左边的是1个月之前做的，右边的是这周做的。可以看到大部分观众朋友们的态度还是比较悲观的，大部分认为反弹很快就会结束。1个月前看牛的只有 23%， 这周投票的时候比例稍微上涨了一些，但也还是不算很多，只有 31%。所以哪怕股市再次探底的话，我觉得应该也还是能够承受得住的吧。这波拉升踏空的朋友是非常多的，甚至有不少是割肉割在了底部的。这个也是为什么我一再说有条件的朋友尽量不要空仓的原因。只要是你有稳定收入来源的，底仓还是要保留一些的。哪怕说你在急跌的时候不敢加仓，但是一定不要在那种时候情绪影响智商，说不行了，我扛不住了，然后就割肉了。往往是当你感觉自己扛不住，世界末日就要来的时候，那一般就是阶段性的底部了。要跑的话，也应该是在上涨的过程当中一点点减仓。OK， 那么以上差不多就是本期视频的内容了。看完如果给你带来一些收获的话，走之前千万不要忘记留下一个点赞。关于市场未来的走向，你有什么看法？是什么原因让你还在一直坚持？等等，都欢迎在视频下方发表自己的看法。OK， 那本期视频就暂时先带来到这里了，我们下期视频再见，拜了个拜。